The protagonist has traveled through time. Fortunately he is a great lord, accompanied by beautiful women, and the cook at home is also delicious. The problem is that someone wants to kill him and seize his property. That won't work. In order to be a great lord and enjoy himself, he must clear all obstacles. Keywords of the novel. I actually just want to be a big lord without pop-ups. I just want to be a big lord. Download the complete TXT collection. I just want to be a big lord and read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. The Stupid Lord. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The Stupid Lord, Master Chaos, is awake. Lord is awake. A tall and sturdy figure shouted and ran quickly out of the room. On the spacious and luxurious bed, young Lord Keith, who had just turned 18, sat up, rubbed his head, frowned, and looked at himself in the mirror not far away. A head of black short hair, with an oriental face, a large skeleton, long hands and feet, but without much flesh, appearing somewhat thin. The waist is straight, and even the ribs on both sides can be seen clearly. Chaos furrowed his brows even tighter. In the mirror, besides being a bit thin and looking a bit sickly, he was actually quite handsome. But the problem is this is not him. Yes, at this moment, the soul in this body is no longer the original young lord, but a different plane, a young man on earth who is in his third year of postgraduate entrance examination but passed away due to a cerebral infarction. There was no memory of this body in his mind, but in this scene, from the various objects in the room, his own appearance, and the words of the strong man who had just run out shouting, he probably guessed that this might be another world. Although he didn't have any memory of this body, he understood what the strong man had just shouted, and he had never learned or even heard that language in his previous life. It seems that some abilities are instinctual and do not disappear with the consciousness of the original owner. Quickly, footsteps could be heard from the hallway outside, and it was obvious that a large group of people were rushing towards them. He began to quickly reflect on his own situation. From what the strong man had just shouted, young Master Chaos, and Lord should have been referring to him, and also saying that he was awake, which means that he was in a state of slumber or coma before, and the consciousness of the original owner also disappeared in this state, and was then taken away by him. In the mirror, he looks very young, probably less than 20, so the strong man will shout out the titles, Young Master, and Lord, at the same time. Obviously, it won't be too long for him to advance from Young Master to Lord. He doesn't have any wounds on his body, and coupled with his ghostly appearance, the reason for his coma may be due to a seizure of his own illness. Oh my goodness! Master, you have really woken up. With the protection of the Shen King, the Holy King has appeared, and the Heavenly King has protected you. How fortunate! When the first one arrived was an elderly man with dark skin, well-combed hair, dressed in a beautiful dark robe, looking a bit like a Ladynx from a previous life. When he saw Chaos sitting by the bed, he was quite excited and surprised. Following him closely was the tall figure that had just woken up and rushed out, with a joyful expression on his face. At this moment, Chaos naturally did not recognize these two people, but based on the expression, gaze, and tone on his face, they should be truly happy for him waking up. However, for some reason, Chaos could still see a hint of nervousness on the face of the old man in the robe. Just as Chaos was pondering how to respond appropriately, the robed old man shouted to the door, "Bring it in." Immediately, two guards wearing silver armor and silver face armor walked into the room with a woman tightly bound by a golden chain. It's all this lowly servant. It's putting the master in danger. Please handle it. It's not too much to let her spirit explode and devour her body. The old man in the robe looked down at the girl who was kneeling on the ground and said with hatred. Chaos noticed that when the old man in the robe said these words, there was a hint of impatience in the eyes of the tall young man behind him, while the woman on the ground struggled and let out sobs. How long have I been asleep? After careful consideration, Keith spoke his first words when he came to this world. He heard his own voice for the first time, and it was a novel language in this foreign world, but there was no hint of discord or strangeness, it was very magical. The master has been unconscious for 2 whole days, and both Master Cheen and Dominic have come to see him, but there is nothing he can do. The old man in the robe said, "Fortunately, the master has great luck and has survived. I'm unconscious because of her." Keith looked at the woman on the ground. Upon hearing these words, the old man in the robe was taken aback for a moment, looked at the woman, and said, "At that time, only Sylvia and the master were in the room, so naturally she couldn't get rid of the connection." Chaos suddenly said to the 2 silver-armored guards, "Let her lift her head." The 2 guards immediately released their hands and released their suppression of the woman. The woman named Sylvia immediately lifted her head and revealed a stunning eastern face, with pear blossoms and rain, delicate and sorrowful. She looked at Chaos with big eyes, tears streaming down her face, but her mouth was tied with a piece of cloth and she couldn't speak. She could only sob incessantly, clearly wanting to say something. Even though Sylvia's long hair is messy, her face is covered in tears, and she is haggard and disheveled, with just this look up, Keith still sees her heart racing. This woman is so beautiful, especially those eyes, which make people feel reluctant to move away. "Let her speak," Keith ordered again. A silver-armored guard immediately took off the cloth strip that Salvira had sealed her mouth, and then Chaos immediately heard the woman's somewhat hoarse, crying but very pleasant voice. "Young master." "No, old master. I dare not have any intention of harming the old master. If the old master is really in danger because of the slave, please only punish the slave and not anger the slave family. They are all the loyal servants of the old master." The old man in the long robe beside him frowned slightly as he listened and said to the 2 silver-armored guards, "Take her down. The master has just woken up and can't stand this kind of noise." The 2 silver-armored guards almost looked at Chaos at the same time, who also nodded and said, "Take it down first, I'll deal with it later." After a slight pause, he said, "Give her some water and food, wash her face." "Yes." The 2 silver-armored guards obediently lifted the person out, and Sylvia clearly heard that Keith's tone was softer, without further struggle or shouting, and was quietly lifted away. Chaos also noticed from the voices of the 2 guards that they were both female guards. "Master." The old man in the robe seemed to want to say something, but Keith rubbed his forehead and interrupted him, "I feel a bit tired. If there's nothing that needs to be dealt with immediately, I'll take a break first." The old man in the robe could only respectfully step down, but when the tall servant was also preparing to go out with him, Chaos pointed at him and said, "You stay for now." "Yes." Gao Xuanfu immediately stopped and stood back in the room. The old man in the robe glanced at the tall and sturdy servant before continuing to maintain his posture facing Chaos and slowly exiting the room, closing the door. Chaos stood up from the bed, his knees softened, and he almost sat back. The tall servant was startled and quickly came over to help, but he waved his hand, indicating that there was no need. Chaos maintained his balance, took a deep breath, and said, "I need to adjust myself." Then, he slowly walked to the window on the other side of the room, pulled the curtains back a bit, looked at the scenery outside, and said, "I woke up this time. I don't remember anything." After he finished speaking, he turned around to look at the tall and sturdy servant, and indeed saw a surprised expression on his face. "Young master, you don't remember anything." Keith nodded and sighed, "When I woke up, I didn't remember anything, even my own name. What was your name, what was the name of others, what happened before, why I was here, I couldn't remember anything. My mind was empty. But for some reason, when I saw you, I felt a genuine sense of warmth and trust." Using amnesia as an excuse is the most secure initial response plan that Keith has considered comprehensively. But after a brief conversation with the robed old man and Sylvia, he changed his mind. The excuse for amnesia naturally still needed to be used, but he was prepared to first interact with people one by one. Although judging from the performance and words of the robed old man, he is likely to hold a position like a butler, which is the most suitable target for information collection. Keith caught a hint of deliberately hidden tension in his expression, and some responses also showed an inexplicable sense of urgency in him. As for Sylvia, she is indeed breathtaking in beauty, but Chaos is not yet blinded by her beauty. Since she was the only person who stayed with the original owner before he fell into a coma, it is necessary to take precautions first. However, even if she is related to the original owner's coma, she should not have taken the initiative to assassinate or engage in such behavior. Compared to the two of them, this tall and sturdy servant who could see his back from the moment he opened his eyes, based solely on his various reactions and his ability to stay in the room and be the first to realize his awakening, Chaos believed that he should be a relatively simple person with a high loyalty to the original owner, so he chose to learn information from him first. Of course, through simple probing, it was found that the two silver-armored guards were clearly more obedient to his orders than the robed old man, which saved him a lot of worries. Otherwise, even if he had to contact the high-ranking servants first, he would definitely have to give the robed old man some mercy. As soon as he finished his carefully designed words, Gao Zhuanpu was indeed shocked at first, and then showed an excited expression. The Nock family is the 9th-generation loyal servant of the Li family. Harvey Nock is the loyal servant of Master Chaos for 18 years. The young master can naturally feel Harvey's loyalty. Harvey. Is that what I usually call you? Keith said. Usually, the young master calls me Tall. Ah. The young master is no longer the young master. I always forget. Harvey patted his head in frustration. Chaos smiled and said, "It's okay, I'll allow you to continue calling me young master. And you, do you prefer me to call you big man or Harvey? Young master can call me anything." Harvey said happily. Harvey, do you think your Nock family has been serving the Li family for 9 generations? Although he has admitted to amnesia, Keith did not immediately ask basic questions like, "Who am I?" or "Where is this?" Instead, he started with the information provided by Harvey to avoid making him feel too abrupt and unfamiliar. Yeah. Since the first generation of Lord Dipper took root here, our Nock family has been loyal servants, warriors, and followers of the Li family. And we are the first batch of sole contract servants of Lord Dipper. Harvey said with great pride. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Contract Servants. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Contract Servants through communication with loyal servant Harvey. In secondary analysis and refinement of information, Chaos quickly identified his own situation. Firstly, this is indeed a foreign world. They are located in an area called the Holy Blessing Alliance, and the nearby main city is Yulang City. Dispel Li, the ancestor of the original owner Chaos Li, was one of the earliest aristocratic powerhouses to explore the vicinity of Yulang City, and managed a large area of land for the Li family. The descendants of the Li family in the following generations, although not much pioneering and enterprising, operated steadily and gradually developed. However, due to the division of many inheritors in each generation, as well as the generation of Chaos's father, the overall assets of the main branch still shrank slightly. Fortunately, Chaos's father only has this one son, so there is no need to divide him further. Chaos has been weak since childhood and almost died of 3 major illnesses before the age of 1. She then used special secret techniques to recuperate and stabilize her physical condition, but her emotions could not fluctuate too much and she could not engage in too intense exercise. Therefore, she banned women from a young age. It was not until the age of 18, when Chaos had completed the final stage of the secret law, that he was ready to release himself from his virginity, and Sylvia was the adult gift he had prepared for himself for 10 years. These 4 words were spoken from Harvey's mouth. The original owner fell into a coma after meeting Sylvia alone for the first time. No wonder he had seen Sylvia bound in such a colorful way before, and the long-haired old man would say those words. Oh, by the way, he also knew from Harvey that the long-haired old man was Harvey's grandfather, Peter Nock, who had served as a butler for 3 generations of the Lee family lords. However, Chaos was not worried about what threat old Pete would pose to him, because he learned from Harvey about the greatest privilege of this world's aristocracy. Noble lords can sign sole subordination contracts with their servants, and the life and death of the servants can be determined by the lord's decision, even if the lord dies. All servants who have established sole subordination contracts will also die instantly together. That is to say, including Harvey Knock, Pete Knock, Sylvia Dawn, and all the servants who are in or not in this mansion, belonging to the Lee family, and have the ability to cultivate, are all tightly controlled by his thoughts, and he has absolute control. This has greatly enhanced his sense of security, allowing him to think more calmly about the next countermeasures. After learning about the existence of the sole subordination contract, Chaos naturally thought of a question. Since the death of the lord's servants would also lead to their death, if other lords encountered a situation like the original lord, did not encounter crossing, died suddenly, and did not have time to transfer all the subordinate contracts, wouldn't the servants all be ruined? Then he learned one of the intelligences of the so-called Holy Blessing Alliance, to avoid such situations from happening. Grand lords usually have wills with soul imprints stored in the Holy Blessing Heart Temple. In case of any unforeseen circumstances, the wills will automatically transfer all the soul subordination contracts to the heirs. However, lords like the original lord who have just inherited the lord's position and have not yet made a soul imprint will, or those who are unwilling to make a will for other reasons, if they accidentally die, the contract servants will really perish together. According to records, a great lord who had not made a will was assassinated by an enemy and died. At the same time, more than 400 powerful contract servants did not have time to solve the assassin, so they all died together, allowing the assassin to escape from the scene. Of course, the assassin was ultimately captured by the punishment team of the Holy Alliance and tortured for 3 months before dying. Not all of this information was obtained from Harvey. After briefly understanding some basic information with Harvey, he used the excuse that seeing familiar places in daily life can help restore memory, and asked Harvey to take him to the area where the original owner of this huge mansion often activities. The place is too large to be fully explored in a short time. Then he discovered a good place, a study that had been continuously renovated and added by previous lords, starting from the first Lord Dispel Lee who built this mansion. Chaos found several books from it, including a brief history of the continent, the soul contract system, the history of the Holy Alliance, basic magic, and spiritual cultivation theory. He briefly browsed through them and learned some basic information. Then, while flipping through the book, The Holy Alliance, the establishment of the most holy and great organization, Keith suddenly frowned when he saw the introduction to the basic functions of the Holy Alliance. According to the book, within the territory controlled by the Alliance, only the sole subordination contract provided by the Alliance can be used. Any attempt to break the sole subordination contract will be dealt a blow by the Alliance, and the Alliance will ensure the effectiveness of the subordination contract. If a noble lord violates the Covenant of Blessings or engages in other acts of rebellion against the Covenant of Blessings, the Covenant of Blessings may be stripped of the soul of the noble lord by a joint resolution of 9 elders and the lord. If the spiritual or physical condition of a noble lord is unable to fulfill his duties as a lord, on the application of 2 direct blood relatives within 3 generations or 5 collateral blood relatives within 3 generations, the Holy Alliance may send someone to determine whether to deprive and redistribute the soul subordination contract he possesses. Keith immediately thought of what the butler, old Pete, wearing a robe, had just said in the bedroom. The master has been unconscious for 2 whole days now. Master Cheen and Dominic the Great Wizard have all come to see him, but there is nothing they can do. What would be the thoughts of the Lord's contract servants and his relatives when he fell into a coma and saw that he was hopeless? He learned from Harvey that although the original owner was an only child and his parents were no longer there, he could not find 2 direct blood relatives from the 3rd generation. However, it was still easy to gather 5 collateral blood relatives from the 3rd generation. He thought of the mysterious coma of the original owner again, pondered for a moment, and said to Harvey, who was helping him move and find books, ask someone to bring Sylvia over. Harvey responded, but hesitated as he was about to leave the study room. He turned around and whispered, "Young master, with Salvira's talent, she will definitely become a martial saint in the future. It's a pity to kill her." "Who told you I wanted to kill her?" "Ah. Young master is not." "Oh. I understand." Harvey didn't know what came to his mind, so he slammed his head and opened the door, rushing out. In no time, Harvey brought the 2 silver-armored female guards and brought Sylvia to the study. "Unbind her chains and then go out," Keith said. The 2 female guards had no doubts and immediately untied the tightly bound chain on Sylvia's body. This chain not only locked her body, but also limited her magic and spiritual energy. After the 2 female guards left, Chaos raised his chin at Harvey and said, "You go out too." "Oh." After Harvey left, Keith looked at Sylvia kneeling on the ground and said, "Tell me the whole story of that night, from beginning to end." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Visual Impact. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Visual Impact. Sylvia quickly recounted the process of her first meeting with this young lord 2 days ago. The process was actually very simple. Less than a minute after she entered the bedroom, Keith fainted and quickly called for someone to come in and invite a doctor. During this process, she didn't even have a chance to say a word to Chaos. Listening to her description, Chaos increasingly felt that there was something suspicious about the original owner's coma. He didn't first tell Sylvia that he had amnesia, so normally, she wouldn't have lied about the description before the original owner's coma. "You stand up first," Keith said. "Yes." It was obvious that the guards had just listened to his orders and washed Sylvia's face, making her look much brighter now, with increasingly delicate and beautiful features. However, Keith noticed that her thick robe looked a bit bulky and didn't match the current temperature. It looked more like a winter coat or coat, unlike the exquisite summer robe of the old butler Pete. He casually said, "Why are you wearing this dress? It's not hot." Upon hearing these words, Sylvia lowered her head to look at her long robe and coat, as if she had thought of something. She bit her lower lip lightly, blushing slightly, and whispered, "Master, your body just now." "I'm afraid." Keith said inexplicably, "I feel okay for the time being." Then Sylvia let out a took a deep breath, untied the thick waistband of her robe, and it fell back to the ground. Chaos's eyes widened and he froze for a moment. Under Salvira's robe, she wasn't naked, she was still wearing a set of clothes, but this one it looks like a semi-transparent black veil, which in Chaos's eyes looks like a 1-piece stockings, with intricate and exquisite lace weaving covering several key areas, faintly visible. On the feet are a pair of black boots with a midsole, which looks extremely impactful overall. Chaos instantly retracted his earlier judgment, as he had traveled from the world of the information explosion and was well informed. Seeing this scene, he felt a bit congested and had difficulty breathing, not to mention the original owner who was born weak and even required to ban femininity until the age of 18. Seeing this scene, it is highly possible to be hit hard and have a hiccup. "Master, how are you doing?" "It's very beautiful." Keith felt his voice was a bit dry and floating. Salvira breathed a sigh of relief and said, "This outfit was designed by the master himself, right? I was worried before that I wouldn't have the chance to wear it for the master to see. I don't know if I have shown the master's design now." Upon hearing these words, Chaos was slightly taken aback and said thoughtfully, "Are you saying that when you saw me 2 days ago, I didn't see you like this?" He originally thought that although Sylvia didn't speak when she saw the original owner, she showed up in this outfit. Unexpectedly, she didn't even take off her coat. Sylvia looked at him with some confusion, as if she had forgotten to answer for a moment. "After waking up this time, I forgot a lot, including my experience that night," Keith said, "so I need to confirm, did you take off this outfit when you entered the room before I fell into a coma?" Salvira shook her head in shock and said, "No, I didn't say anything or do anything." Master, you just fell to the ground. There's a problem with that. Keith frowned tightly, got up and took a few steps, then turned back to look at Sylvia and said, "Do you think why did I go unconscious?" Salvira looked a bit confused and said, "The master has not been constantly adjusting his body and cannot see women, so all the women in the estate, including the guards and maids in the city house, have to cover their faces. The maidservants have also been unable to see the master until that day. I think it's because I saw the maidservants. So I blame the maidservants." "What did the doctor say, sir?" Upon hearing these hesitant and stumbling words, Keith knew that she felt that the original owner had fainted at the sight of her face, just out of a habitual perception in the criticism of the old butler Pete, a natural judgment. "You put on your coat first," Keith said, looking away. His body and almost transparent clothes were too tempting. Even if he tried to restrain himself, it was difficult for him to calm down and think. While Sylvia was wearing her long robe jacket, Keith had already sat back at the table, contemplating the various information she had received so far. The doctor's diagnosis, even the judgment of the Dominic demon, that old Pitt had previously mentioned, he had just asked Harvey, saying that it was something related to the damage to the heart and soul. In short, it is related to the original physical condition, and there is currently no good way to deal with it. There is more harm than good. Chaos is not very clear about the interpersonal relationships of the original Lord, but based on his current understanding, it is difficult for him to believe that the original Lord's sudden life-threatening coma is not a problem. Just by looking at the backgrounds and conditions of the young and physically weak Lord has just inherited the property. He has fallen into a state of imminent death upon inheriting the property. He lacks direct blood relatives and has many collateral blood relatives, and there is a mechanism for collateral blood relatives to apply to the Holy Alliance for a change of ownership of the soul contract. Looking at Sylvia, who had already put on her robe again, Chaos suddenly asked, "How far are you from the Martial Saint now?" Salvira was taken aback when asked this question, and after a while, she said with uncertainty, "Master, I am currently at level 8, a mid-level spiritual energy warrior, and at least 4 levels away from the Martial Saint." "What is level 8 at your age? How old are you?" Keith asked. "Master, I have just turned 16 years old and my birthday is on the same day as my master. If we only talk about spiritual energy and spiritual control skills, I should be considered quite talented among non-college spiritual energy practitioners." "What is your college background?" Keith asked. "They are spiritual beings or wizards who graduated from the Sacred Heart Academy of the Holy Blessing Alliance. They mainly work for the Alliance and join the Order of Punishing Knights," said Sylvia, seeming worried about being too humble and expressing herself inaccurately. She added, "In fact, in terms of current practical combat abilities, maids are not inferior to the Academy faction of the same age." Keith nodded and said, "You can be my guard in the future." Salvira blinked her beautiful big eyes in confusion and said, "Master, I was supposed to be your personal guard after you turned 18. However, halfway through, she suddenly remembered that Chaos had said he couldn't remember many things, and her expression became even more joyful. That is to say, although the master didn't remember anything, after seeing her, he once again chose her as his personal guard. "Don't worry, Master. Sylvia will definitely become a martial saint as soon as possible and protect you." Chaos was unaware of the significance of being a close attendant to the contractual servants of this world, and now he couldn't care to explore where Shalvira's obvious sense of joy came from, as there were higher priority issues to be solved. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Butler Peter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Butler Peter. The original location of Sylvia's station in the study has now been changed to the old Butler Pete. However, after Pete was called in by Sylvia, Keith sat at the desk reading without saying a word to him. After about a dozen or so minutes, Keith remained silent. Finally, Pete couldn't help but say, "Master, what do you want for dinner?" The servant asked someone to go. "Did the big guy tell you?" Keith interrupted him. "Say. What?" Old Pete exclaimed in surprise. Keith looked at him and said, "Didn't you just come over and meet the big guy? Encountered him, he's guarding the staircase. He looks like he's quite happy. What did the master say to him?" Old Pete puzzled and said, "So is Sylvia. She looks very happy. Has the master pardoned her? Amnesty. Do you really think my coma is related to her? This." Old Pete, Dominic the Great Wizard came to see me to make sure that I was indeed hopeless and would definitely die, right? Keith's tone suddenly became chilly. Pete's body trembled suddenly, and his upper body disappeared with a shudder, startling Keith behind the table. He stretched his neck to see that he was instantly kneeling to the ground. "Master." Pete is absolutely loyal to the Lee family and the master. Those surnamed Nork will never betray the Lee family. Pete said in a mournful voice. Ko said softly, "It's not just me surnamed Lee." Pete's voice became increasingly anxious. "Only the master is the only orthodox of the Lee family. Pete is only loyal to the master." "When did they apply for arbitration at the Holy Blessing Palace?" Keith asked again. Pete hesitated for a moment and whispered, "It should be yesterday, when Dominic the Great Wizard came over." Trent was also outside. After saying these words, Pete's voice suddenly became much more relaxed, as if he understood that sophistry or deception were no longer useful, and he accepted his fate. "Master, the servant was unable to prevent them from submitting to arbitration. The crime is unforgivable, please punish the master. The servant was wrong, but the rest of the Knock family, Harvey and the others, are truly loyal to the master and have no second thoughts. If they know the purpose of Dominic's arrival, they will even try their best to stop it. It's all the servant hiding it from them, and the blame lies solely with the servant." Keith leaned back into his seat and no longer looked at the butler Pete kneeling below. Instead, he slowly flipped through a large booklet next to him, which was a simplified genealogy of the Lee family. Quickly, he found a line of words from above that read, "Trent Lee, born in." The quite in Pete's mouth is probably quite Lee, the eldest son of his third uncle, Van Boer Lee. Keith thought for a moment and asked, "How much do you think my coma has to do with them? If they were to take action, how would they do it?" After the master fell into a coma, the servant immediately called for Dr. Grossman to confirm that the master had not eaten any toxic substances. Later, Dr. Cheen came over to confirm that the master had no signs of poisoning, and all symptoms were endogenous to the body. Keith thinks quickly and weighs the pros and cons. As a traveler, from a third perspective, it is understandable that if the death of the original owner was not directly or indirectly caused by Pete, and in the situation where the original owner was clearly hopeless, in order to protect oneself, it is assumed that the Lee family's children, such as Quite, used the rules of the Holy Blessing Alliance to deprive the original owner of the ownership of the soul's subordinate contract. After all, they do not want to die in vain with the original owner like this. However, to understand, he will definitely not speak directly. And he can't confirm now that Pete is in a coma with the original owner, it's completely unrelated. Even the two doctors and a great wizard mentioned by Pete are not without the possibility of being bribed. After waking up today, I forgot a lot of things, and even couldn't remember my own name for a while. However, no matter what, I trust the people of the Knock family, you and Harvey. Next, you need to help me pay attention to the people in the estate and see if there are any abnormal behaviors. After Chaos finished speaking, old Pete, who was kneeling on the ground, looked up in surprise. After a few seconds, he seemed to have thought of something and quickly put his head back on the ground, trembling in his voice, saying, "Master is kind. I will definitely not betray Master's trust. If there is a traitor in the estate, I will definitely pull him out." After asking the butler Peter to leave, Keith began searching for books of interest in the study again. He found that the most eye-catching, easily accessible, and readable books in this study were all in the art category, such as the Pinette Landscape Painting Collection, Teacher Gao's 3 lectures on painting art, Basic Theory of Xingyu Music Rhythm, Fundamentals of Light and Image Recording, and Appreciation of the Top 10 Famous Paintings of Shengyu Tianhua Temple Over the Years, Part 1. At the next level, there are objects and books related to the Li family's genealogy, annual records, family picture books, as well as various materials related to the Holy Alliance, Three Kings, and Holy Academy. And those that should be very important in Chaos's view, such as 17 questions on the essence of magic and spiritual energy, magic system, Holy Blessing Academy 4th edition, geographical foundations of the core continent, where are the borders of the inland land, common plants in the Holy Blessing Alliance, 1, navigation history of the Holy Blessing Alliance, chronicle of the main continent, 500 years of glory in Yulang City, and other books and materials related to the power system, geography, and history of this world, are surprisingly placed in the innermost difficult-to-find bookshelves. Even some basic theoretical books on the spiritual system have not been put on the bookshelf. He found them in a few boxes piled up in the corner of the study. How much did the successive lords of the Li family love art? However, for the current Chaos, the fundamental information and power system of this other world are his top priorities to understand. After dying once, even in a different world, he doesn't want to die again. God knows if he can still cross the river after dying again. We must save our lives and live well. After knocking on the door, Sylvia's pleasant voice rang out. "Sir, dinner has been delivered." "Come in," Keith said, and saw Sylvia push open the door and walk in with a plate. Salvira disappeared for just a few minutes, and as she looked at him, she suddenly became even more radiant. Especially when she looked at him, there was an indescribable admiration in her eyes, as if a star-chasing girl had finally met her idol up close. Is it just the appointment of personal guards? But didn't she say that she was supposed to be her personal guard? Keith couldn't quite understand Sylvia's emotional journey and didn't think much. His gaze fell on the plate. Looking at the dishes on the plate that leaned towards Chinese cuisine in both cooking and serving methods, as well as the pair of chopsticks, Keith was naturally amazed. This world has so many similarities with the previous world that it is difficult to believe that there is no connection between the two worlds. "You haven't had dinner yet, have you? Go and have someone bring a set of utensils together," Keith said casually. However, as soon as he was about to say it, he saw Salvira's sparkling eyes filled with fear. He even waved his hand and couldn't speak smoothly, saying, "Servant." "No, this is." "Servant, wait a moment." "Master." From her expression, it seemed that old Pete had previously said he wanted her to be spiritually devoured and execute her, but he was not as frightened as he is now. "What are you thinking?" "I mean, I asked you to go eat too." Keith changed his mind. He knew he had just crossed over and didn't quite understand the thoughts of people with different identities in this world, so in the short term, he tried not to instill his values and cognitive system in others, which was safer. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Has something to do with this alien realm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 has something to do with this alien realm. After putting down the plate, Sylvia asked again, "Sir, do you want the servants to come in and serve you?" "No need," Keith said. After Sylvia left, he picked up a piece of pork ribs from the plate and tasted it. The taste was surprisingly good. With a flick of his tongue, the bones and flesh separated instantly, and the meat was rotten but not scattered. The taste of soup and spices also tasted into the meat. He took a bite and the juice was not much, but it was fragrant and overflowing. This alien realm. Having traveled through a different world for a few hours now, relying solely on the reasons of pork ribs and Sylvia is enough for him to do his best to stay. After reading the books she was interested in for a while, Chaos felt a bit tired. He got up and walked out of the study, where he saw Sylvia guarding the door and Harvey standing further down the stairs. He said to the latter, "How did you get there?" "Master, I am a personal guard, and Harvey is a grand guard. According to regulations, when we guard, there is a requirement for standing, so we need to distance ourselves and create depth, explained Sylvia in a low voice. Chaos was a bit surprised. He thought Harvey was also a personal guard, and it seemed that this, personal guard, was still a rather formal position. Master, where are you going? Harvey rushed over with a jolt, his emotions still looking high, and there was no difference because Sylvia had surpassed him to become a personal guard. Although Caius allowed him to continue calling him young master, he cleverly changed his name to master in front of others. I'll go to my previous bedroom and check out the room I used to stay in, maybe I can recover my memory faster. Master, the room you used to spend the most time in was not the bedroom. Oh. Where is that? A few minutes later, under Harvey's guidance, he and Sylvia arrived in a spacious room. After Harvey lit the magic lamp, he saw the scene inside the room and couldn't help but take a breath. In this room, the walls are almost covered with paintings, and the corners are also filled with various painting tools. There are also easels one after another, and some of them seem to be unfinished. And these paintings, all in one color, are a bright red, or rather blood red. Apart from red, there is only a hint of black as a base, and the magic lights in the studio are also slightly red, making it look even more eerie. Harvey, however, proudly introduced, "Sir, these are all your works. Your works, your painting skills, are well known throughout the entire Holy Blessing Alliance. You can change a farm or even a factory with just one painting. So in this world where there are spiritual beings and magicians, the original Lord is actually a painter." Keith asked Harvey, "Have I never practiced spiritual energy or magic?" Harvey looked a little surprised and said, "Of course you haven't practiced it before. You are a noble lord and Baron Sanyi. How could you practice magic and spiritual energy? Of course, these are what we servants practice. Your noble and agile hands and creative mind should be used to create this kind of human art." If it weren't for Harvey's sincere words, Sylvia next to him would have nodded repeatedly. Just listening to this content, Chaos would have thought he was mocking himself. "I understand, let me take a look at these paintings. You guys go out first." Keith didn't ask much, but he knew he would definitely find ways to cultivate spiritual energy and magic in the future. Walking in front of the red paintings in the studio, Keith's eyebrows were almost furrowed. He couldn't figure out who the original owner was. Even though the main color of these paintings was red, the content of the paintings looked a bit ferocious or even brutal. Many of the patterns on the paintings clearly appear to be skeletons, amputated limbs, murder scenes, or battlefields, while others are more brutal scenes, such as one person dismembering another person, one person throwing dismembered limbs into a pot, one person tearing open their own belly to extract their organs, another person receiving the organs handed over for cleaning, and next to them are lit firewood and pots placed on top. All of them are red, with only a small amount of black as the base. There is not much outlining of the details, and even at first glance, if you don't pay attention, you may think it's just random graffiti and stacked color blocks. But for some reason, he can just see the real content being painted in that pile of red at a glance, and even vaguely feel the emotions conveyed by the painting. Cruelty, unwillingness, anger, repression, sadness, pain, madness. All kinds of emotions, but none of them are negative emotions. Chaos looked at them for a while and felt like he was also going to be affected. Just as he was about to leave the studio, a painting caught his attention. He squatted down and bent down to look at the painting that seemed to be casually thrown in a corner, leaning against the edge of the cabinet. He found that the color of the painting was different from the other paintings. Although it was the same red, it was relatively light and a bit strange. He gently rubbed his fingers and instantly understood that it was blood. This was drawn with blood by the original owner. A very tragic scene appeared in his mind, with all the surrounding lights disappearing, as if he was trapped in a sea of blood abyss. Chaos was startled and suddenly stood up straight, taking 2 steps back to finally withdraw from the situation. He looked at the painting in shock and then at his own arm, which was really creepy just now, with goosebumps all over his body. It seems that this original owner is not really a normal person. Coming out of the studio, Chaos felt a bit hot in his heart. After returning to his current bedroom, he instinctively hugged Sylvia who had entered with him, and the faint black veil suit he had seen recently came to mind. His hand, as if he had his own ideas, quickly untied a button on her long robe jacket and crawled inside. He didn't directly touch his skin, but compared to his skin, the silky touch made his mind ripple even more. Salvira's waist was without any excess fat, tight and smooth. Keith's hand couldn't help but want to explore upwards, but at this moment, his eyes suddenly turned black and his body couldn't hold back. Originally shy and nervous, Sylvia instantly reacted and turned around, hugging him and placing him on the bed. "Master. How are you, Master?" Chaos did not lose consciousness, he was just a bit dizzy. Just as he was about to say something, he noticed that his nose was sour, as if something was flowing out. He touched it and his hand was bleeding. Damn it. The original owner's body is really garbage. However, when he looked up again at the beautiful female bodyguard, he suddenly noticed that a blue halo appeared behind her head after feeling a bit shy, nervous, worried, and scared. With just one glance, he realized that this aperture was related to the spiritual impact he had received in the studio before, but he didn't understand what it represented specifically for a moment. Sylvia was clearly not aware of the halo appearing behind her head and was anxiously wiping his nose with a handkerchief. "It's okay," Keith sat up from the bed, buttoning up Sylvia's coat while saying, "Tell Harvey to come in." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Favorite Aperture. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Favorite Aperture. Chaos strolled around the estate for a while and found that every person he met had an aperture behind their heads, and only he could see it. Sylvia's aperture is all blue, Harvey's aperture is 2/3 blue, and the rest is yellow. However, even the blue part is much lighter than Sylvia's blue. Pete Butler's aperture is 2/3 yellow and 1/3 gray. Other people, like those silver armored guards, mostly have yellow as the majority, blue as the minority, and some are almost all gray with a hint of purple. After performing exclusion discrimination, before going to bed, Chaos had a basic guess about this aperture. It should be related to the person's perception of him, in short, his favorability. He judged that blue is a feeling of trust, which is currently the highest level of intimacy, yellow is a secondary level, which should be a level of respect, gray should be emotionless, indifferent and distant, is purple annoying or scary. He's not very sure, but it's definitely negative. He had just confirmed his journey before, and when he first met old Pete, Harvey, and Sylvia, he realized that he could keenly perceive or sense the emotions of others, even detecting small changes. Later, when he learned about the contract of soul subordination, he felt that this ability should be related to the contract. As a lord, he could easily see the emotional changes and sincerity of the contract servants. And now this visual favorability aperture should be a product of the combination of soul subordination contracts and something just felt in the studio. Anyway, this is a very useful ability that can help him better seek benefits and avoid harm. The next morning, as soon as Chaos woke up, the old butler Pete rushed over and reported to him that the great demon of Dominica should come to inspect his situation today. Because yesterday, as soon as he woke up, someone had already been sent to the Holy Blessing Palace in Yulang City to report to the great demon of Dominica and Judge Pandey. Previously, Dominic the Great Demon came to see the situation of Chaos and sent the review opinion of depriving Chaos of all soul affiliation contracts through special procedures to the Holy City. Once the elders of the Holy City and the Alliance leader pass the resolution, there will be punitive knights and holy blessed mages rushing to fulfill the resolution with the soul subordination contract backed up in the Holy Blessed Heart Temple, which will be very troublesome. So the earlier you let Dominic re-inspect and change the review comments, the better it would be to send them back to Shindu. Naturally, the old butler's approach is not a problem. With a favorable aperture, it was discovered that old Pete was predominantly yellow, and Keith became much less wary of him. Last night, the old servant sent someone to inform our nearest manager, Mr. Hu, of the Qinglu factory. He came early this morning and is a high-level wizard at level 11, so he can hold up a bit of the show. Later, our estate's guard leader, Lu Hao, will also come to see you. He started serving as the estate's guard leader 4 years ago and is currently a high-level spiritual warrior at level 10. While Keith was having breakfast at the restaurant, old Pete stood beside him and quietly introduced his itinerary for today, as well as the people and events he would encounter. Considering his amnesia, he would also provide detailed information about these people. Last night, Chaos actually knew about the existence of the estate guard Tonglu Hao from Harvey. At that time, he was still very puzzled. As the guard leader, he was still the highest-ranked spiritual spirit warrior in the estate. Why didn't he come to see him like Pete when he woke up? However, Harvey and Sylvia both told him that this guard commander was not important, because although Lu Hao was a level 10 spiritual spirit warrior, he was already 76 years old and his actual combat power was actually quite limited. Moreover, in terms of the rank of contract servants, he is actually just like Harvey, both of whom are Grand Guards, one level lower than Sharvira's personal guards. Strictly speaking, at this time in the Li family estate, the highest-ranking guard in this sequence is actually Sylvia. Yesterday, while browsing through family-related materials, he came across 2 promotion paths for contract servants in the Li family. It is unclear whether they are common to all nobles in the Holy Blessing Alliance, or only the Li family. One is the guard route, which is divided into Light Guard, Full Armor Guard, Grand Guard to Guard Chief, while Close Guard is at the same level as Guard Chief. Basically, the contract servants who are dispatched to lead elite teams to develop territories and guard fortresses for the Li family as leaders will all hold the title of Chief Guard, which determines the status and various benefits of the contract servants. In addition to the guard route, there is also the butler route, which includes servant, servant, servant chief to butler. For example, the one manager who is coming today is wearing the title of butler and receiving corresponding treatment. There is a reason why Lu Hao, as the commander of the guards, only holds the title of Grand Guard. After finishing breakfast, Chaos saw Manager Wan and the gray-haired guard leader Lu Hao who came in to salute. Seeing the master personally handling affairs in a strong and spirited manner, the villain is truly delighted and excited. I hope the master will continue to take good care of his health in the future. Wan is a middle-aged man in his 30s, who, like Pete, is of Lading's descent from Keith's past life. He appeared very excited when he met him, seemingly showing great concern and loyalty to Keith's health. But Chaos not only judged through his emotions that he was not so excited, but also from the half-purple and a small part gray aperture behind his head, it was evident that this guy was actually very disgusted with himself or the original owner, without even respect, let alone loyalty and trust. On the other hand, Lu Hao, a rare and spiritual warrior who appeared to just give a faint cry of "Master," had a half-blue and half-yellow halo behind him. Among the people he had seen so far, his favorability was second only to that of Sylvia and Harvey. However, Chaos did not immediately show his likes and dislikes, closeness, and even deliberately chatted with Wan for a few more words. Less than an hour after he met Wan and Rojo, the Dominic demon arrived at the estate under the escort of 12 punishing knights. Chaos led a group of guards and butlers out of the camp. As suggested by old Pete, although Dominic himself was only a contract servant, he was the contract lord of Judge Pandey of the Holy Blessing Palace in Yulang City, and also one of the advisors of the Holy Blessing Palace. As a 3-leaf baron, Chaos needed to establish a good relationship with the other party. However, as soon as he saw Dominic, Keith almost couldn't hold his breath. It wasn't because he felt a hint of curiosity in Dominic's displeasure, but because at the moment he felt the emotions, a halo appeared behind his head. This means that whether it is emotional perception or the aperture representing favorability, it is not related to the contract of soul subordination. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Lu Hao. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Lu How the aperture behind Dominic's head is mostly gray, with less than 1/10 of purple, which looks far less repulsive than many of the Lee family's own servants and guards in the manner towards chaos. This kind of favorability, although certainly not friendly to chaos, may also be bribed to do something against him, but it is highly likely that it will not be the mastermind. In the order of punishments that followed Dominic, several of them had purple halos on their backs, with one even having 2/3 purple and the remaining 1/3 being crimson. Although it is the first time I have seen a crimson aperture, based on purple, it can also be seen that this is definitely on the negative side. If purple is defined as dislike, fear, or disgust, then red will definitely reach the level of hatred and hatred. Because the face of the punished knight was covered in the same standard armor, Chaos could only secretly record the characteristics of the red circle, punished knight's armor, mount, and weapon, and then ask someone to inquire later to see if their identity can be determined. His attitude towards himself is not right, it should be towards the original owner, there must be a reason for it. And this 1/3 red circle level disgust definitely gives him a reason to take a black hand on Chaos. After arriving at the estate, Dominic was too lazy to chat and used his magic to quickly detect and check Chaos's physical condition from the air. Then, he frowned and asked, barrenly, "How do you feel now?" "Not bad, just a little more cultivation." Dominic didn't wait for him to finish speaking and said directly, barrenly, "You have now inherited the title, territory, and soul contract, and are a serious lord. Taking care of your own body is a basic responsibility, and you have the entire territory, all servants, and the lives and even the lives of the people on your shoulders." What he said seemed quite normal and considerate of Chaos, but in reality, his tone was very impolite, like an elder preaching, with a hint of sarcasm, emphasizing the word serious. Although Dominic is essentially a contract servant, the contract servants of the Holy Blessing Palace are fundamentally different from those of ordinary nobles, as they have a layer of official status. Keith, who already understands this, can only pretend to be a snake and deal with it first. However, this review, which was supposed to be just a passing one, ended with unexpected complications. Dominic had originally checked Chaos's situation and after 2 sentences, he was ready to leave. Unexpectedly, a punishment knight leaned over and whispered a few words. He stopped and looked at Chaos thoughtfully for a while before saying, barrenly, "As a nobleman who has already inherited the title, you should first prepare the will for the distribution of soul subordination contracts. Coincidentally, we will send someone to review the report and send it to the Holy City together. This is more secure and good for everyone. This move is ruthless." When Chaos was whispering to Dominic about the punishment knight, he felt uneasy because the knight was a guy with a 1/3 red aperture. Sure enough, after whispering, Dominic turned around and gave him an ultimate move. The reason for having a nobleman with a very poor physical condition make a soul contract will seem very legitimate, and the Lee family contract servants present now will silently agree in their hearts. After all, if he suddenly dies without a soul contract will, they will all be buried with him. Both the former owner and the current Chaos do not have anyone who is eligible for inheritance and has enough trust. If you casually write a name on it, it will definitely bring endless troubles. There is the 1/3 red circle of the punishing knight present, and Chaos does not believe that his soul contract will arrive intact in the Holy City and be placed in the Sacred Heart Temple without anyone knowing its contents. Once those who calculated him know the heir, he probably won't be able to survive. But if he were to use the excuse of not having a suitable heir now, Dominic would definitely mention his uncles and their children. As old Pete had said before, Dominic's first visit was with Trent Lee, and they must have had connections. If he doesn't want to make a soul contract will, he can only exclude the inheritance rights of these collateral blood relatives one by one in front of Dominic. The scene will be very ugly, and it will completely push all collateral blood relatives to the opposite, making other lords realize that he is alone and has no support even in the Lee family. After quickly weighing the pros and cons in his mind, although Keith was reluctant, he could only choose the lesser of the two harms and refuse to make a will. But unexpectedly, before he spoke, the guard leader Lu Hao, who had been standing behind him like a gourd, suddenly took a few steps forward and said to Dominic. "Does my grandfather make a will? When will he make a will? It's up to you to give me guidance." Dominic looked at Lu Hao with graying hair in surprise and said, "What kind of person are you, dare you talk to me like this? I am the leader and chief guard of the Li family's Beishan Manor, and you are just an advisor and mage of the Holy Yu Palace. Everyone is a contract servant, and who is more noble than anyone? Oh, you mean you are a top-level mage at level 12, so you are stronger than me, a high-level spiritual spirit warrior at level 10. In that case, let's have a duel and directly decide life and death." "How dare you?" Lu Hao refused at all. Not only Dominic, but everyone including Keith, Pete the Elder, Juan, the surrounding guards, and the dozen or so punishment knights were all shocked. "You." But Dominic pointed his finger at Lu Hao for a few seconds before saying, "Didn't you see the punished knight behind me? I'm representing the Holy Palace, and the Holy Palace doesn't have the power to supervise nobles to make soul contracts and wills." Although his words were also a questioning before returning to Lu Hao, it seemed as if he deliberately ignored the invitation to a life-and-death duel, which inevitably gave people a feeling of showing weakness. And the punishment knights behind him, including the Red Circle Knight, were all silent and had no intention of coming out to fight on behalf of Lu Hao or even Dominic. This makes chaos a bit strange. According to Harvey, Sylvia, and others, isn't Lu Hao's actual combat power much lower than that of an equal rank? And now he is facing Dominic, who is the top-level magic guide at level 12, and his paper level is much higher than him. Why does he look like he is avoiding battle? Lu Hao still looked imposing, and his volume increased a bit. "The power belongs to the presiding judge of the Xingyu Palace in Yulang City. When will you, as an advisor, also have the same power? You." When Dominic was being refuted by Lu Hao and felt a bit frustrated, Chaos suddenly noticed that old Pete was winking at him, as if asking him to say something. Even Lu Hao, while facing Dominic, kept making gestures with his hand behind his back. Is this asking him to stop Lu Hao? Let one of them play fair and the other play red. Just as he was about to falsely reprimand Lu Hao, Dominic suddenly turned to him and said with a threatening tone, "Barrenly, if you don't give me an explanation today, I'm afraid I don't have the energy to write the review report." Chaos couldn't help but widen his eyes. Although Dominic didn't say it explicitly, he still knew very well what this so-called confession meant. It was asking him to use Lu Hao's life to explain. And it is a blatant use of not writing or delaying the review report as a threat. Once there is a delay on this side and the decision is made by the Holy City to send someone down, although there is a high probability that the decision will still be cancelled in the end. After all, Chaos is a big living person here, and it is impossible to forcibly deprive him of his soul affiliation contract. However, there is a lot of trouble to be dealt with, and it is certain that something else will happen. Upon hearing him say so, Lu Hao turned his head to look at Chaos, but his gaze suddenly became calm, as if he had happily accepted some fate. However, when Chaos spoke, his face lit up with surprise, even more exaggerated than when he had just confronted Dominic. "Should I call you Dominic the Great Wizard or Dominic the Judge?" Keith looked at him expressionlessly. "What do you mean?" Dominic was a bit incredulous. In his opinion, his words just now were already a huge step placed in front of Caius, a clear concession. "My guard commander has just said that the power of supervision and review belongs to the presiding judge of Xingyu Palace. You are just an advisor, acting on your behalf. What qualifications do you have to use this matter to blackmail me? Our Li family is not such a high-ranking aristocrat, but at least we have been operating for nearly 10 generations. Even the Holy City is not without familiar paths. If you don't review, it is your dereliction of duty. I will go to Yulang City to ask the presiding judge whose intention this is, or I can directly send a letter to the Holy City for evaluation and reasoning." After Chaos finished speaking, the whole hall fell silent and everyone was stunned. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Personnel Structure. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Personnel Structure. Dominic's face turned pale and he stared closely at Chaos. Chaos also stared at Dominic, but his expression became much calmer, even a bit wanting to laugh, and he had to hold it back hard. Because just now he saw the aperture behind Dominic's head, which originally accounted for less than 1/10 of the purple color, quickly encroached on the gray part like a greedy snake, and soon occupied nearly half. But after he finished speaking, the nearly half-purple aperture began to retract and flicker, looking like a stretched purple snake that had to spit out its contents again, which was a bit comical. When it finally stabilized, the purple color accounted for less than a quarter, and coupled with the feeling of a bit of nervousness, Chaos judged that this great wizard was cunning. After the two of them exchanged glances for a while, Dominic snorted coldly and quickly checked a few words on the table in his hand. He then handed it to the punishment knight next to him to seal it, and then turned around and left. If it weren't for Keith's constant vigilance and taking a step back in time, he would have been slapped in the face by his clothes. It is obvious that although Dominic was unhappy in his heart, he still chose to sign the review, even fearing that Chaos would misunderstand and cause trouble for the Saint Capital or Judge Ponde. He deliberately signed and sealed it on sight here. Watching Dominic leave the hall with the carriage, Caius squinted and stared at the punishment rider on the left side of the carriage, asking, "Do you know who was whispering to Dominic just now?" "Look at his chest badge, it's the vice captain." "I'll go check it later," Pete whispered, but his face was full of sadness. Keith knew what he was worried about and comforted. Anyway, the Dominic wizard didn't have a good impression of us either. Pete smiled bitterly and shook his head. It shouldn't have been like this. Lu Hao was even more frustrated and said, "Master, you're confused. Although Dominic is just an advisor, he's already a great wizard under the age of 40. His future is even more promising, and he's likely to hold an important position in the Holy City in the future. It's very likely that Dominic will be appointed as a formal priest in an extraordinary way. Even if he doesn't flatter, he shouldn't form enemies." "Big brother. That's not what you said earlier." Keith shook his head and said, "According to his wishes, he wants your life." Lu Hao's tone became even more urgent. "Master. You shouldn't have let Dominic bring it up on your own. You should have taken the life of the old slave to calm Dominic's anger before that." Pete also nodded repeatedly in agreement. Keith frowned and said, "Use the life of your own guard to please him." "No way." Lu Hao was taken aback for a moment, seeming somewhat surprised by this answer, but quickly smiled bitterly and said, "Master, you have forgotten that the old slave has already suffered from a terminal illness of spiritual energy devouring the heart, and he will only live for another 6 months at most." The old slave was clearly identified from the beginning as the head of the estate's guards and the chief guard of the Li family. Coupled with the verbal confrontation with him, the master took me to quell his anger, which is completely sufficient and reasonable. If the master directly let the old slave's spirit explode and devour his body, Dominic will not be able to bring up the matter of the will again, and the review is even more self-evident. If the death of the old slave can help the master settle his anger, it is completely enough, and it is only natural. This matter is worth dying for. Sigh. But now it seems that the old servant just emerged and actually harmed the master. "No, you've been a big help to me." Chaos patted Lu Hao's shoulder and turned to Pete, asking, "Is there no way to treat this spiritual energy devouring the heart?" Pete shook his head and said, "For old Lu, there's nothing he can do." Lu Hao hurriedly said, "Master. If the old slave could have lived to 76, it's already earned. If it weren't for the old baron rescuing the old slave would have died long ago. Now he has lived for an additional 30 years. That's enough, completely enough." At this moment, after the arrival of Dominic, Juan, the manager, Butler, and Great Wizard, who had never made a sound except for greeting each other, suddenly said to Caius, "Sir, I feel like you are more talkative than usual today and have recovered very well." It is truly gratifying. Ko sensed the hesitation and observation in Juan's emotions, and also noticed that the purple color was slightly wriggling and growing in the aperture behind his head. He immediately realized that this guy was probing himself. I'm in good spirits today, not like Manager Juan. I just fell asleep, right? Keith squinted his eyes and looked at Juan, unabashedly speaking in a strange yin-yang way. Juan already had some doubts, and it was useless for him to change the personality traits he displayed. Because he was not sure what the real Chaos should be like and did not simulate learning in advance, so it was better to just follow today's performance and strengthen his character design. And he also wanted to test Juan, this contract servant with a semi-purple halo, to see how much it had to do with the mysterious coma of the original owner. Upon hearing the dissatisfaction in Chaos's words, Juan quickly knelt down and said, "Master, I also saw the situation just now and was anxious in my heart. But at that time. Indeed, what Lao Lu said was reasonable, so you shouldn't force it." Keith patted his head and said, "You make sense. Next time I see Dominic, I'll take you with me." After speaking, he ignored the stunned Juan and left the hall directly, walking toward Sylvia who was waiting at the door. He certainly wouldn't really take Juan to see Dominic, but he knows what he's trying to convey and they all know it very well. Whether it was Lu Hao or Old Pitt's suggestion, he could actually get it, probably knowing what they meant, but at that time he was unwilling to do it in this way, and even unwilling to take a step back and just punish Lu Hao. When he directly confronted Dominic, it was a bit rebellious and intentional. At first, he didn't actually understand why he was like this, but when he saw Lu Hao's regret that he didn't use his life to make peace, as well as the attitude that others thought of it deeply, he vaguely understood. On the contrary, he is not too worried about Dominic. His emotions, changes in Aperture, and performance before and after all show that he is a very pragmatic person. Such people value their interests. As long as their interests match, they can cooperate even if they dislike each other. If their interests clash, they will not be soft-hearted even if they compromise. Just as Keith returned to his study and sat down, the old butler Pete came over to meet him. Juan left. Yes, the affairs at Chinglu factory are busy, and he can't stay too long. Before leaving, he said he would come over in 2 days to apologize to the master. How was my relationship with him before? Pete thought for a moment and said, the master used to have more contact with Juan, Huang Cheng, and Ben Nan, but I'm not sure who he has the best relationship with. Oh, Huang Cheng and Ben Nan, as well as information about the management of other factories and external team leaders, will be organized and sent over by the old servant. Keith nodded and said, I didn't tell anyone about my amnesia, did I? No, the master didn't explain it, and the servant didn't dare to reveal it to anyone else, Pete said respectfully. Well, just let you, me, Harvey, and Sylvia know about this for now. Don't tell the fifth person again, Keith explained. The yellow part of Pete's aperture at the back of his head increased slightly, from about 2/3 to 7/10. Based on the current situation he has investigated, if everyone knows about his amnesia, there will definitely be a lot of trouble. Before he fully grasps the information about himself and the Li family, and clarifies his thoughts, he can hide it as long as possible. Anyway, he now has a preliminary understanding that the original owner is also a senior otaku, who spends most of his time painting in his own estate and courtyard. He has few friends and hardly attends social occasions. Yes, Pete said, taking out a small box from the inner pocket of his robe and handing it over. The servant heard that the master has promoted Sylvia to a personal guard. This is the personal guard badge that the servant brought from the warehouse this morning. You can activate it yourself later and then hand it over to Sylvia. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Activation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Activation. After taking the exquisite metal badge with a coat of arms as the base and a sword shield, Chaos asked, activate. Pete said, Master, use your bracelet. Press the base of the badges back onto the red bead string on the bracelet, and then press it onto the polygonal bead string. After operating according to Keith's words, he found that when the badge was pressed to its position, a stream of heat would be uploaded from the wrist bead string. He could then use his mind to control whether this heat flow continued to be connected. After the heat flow was connected for a while, the badge was activated, and this feeling was very magical. When I first crossed over, I noticed that I had started using this bead string. However, I thought it was just an accessory, but unexpectedly it was still a magical object, and it seemed to be a key object closely related to the Lord's identity. Butler Pete timely introduced, "Master, this bracelet not only activates the badge, but also controls the defense formation of our estate. The main purpose of activating the guard badge is to enable the guards wearing it to be recognized by the formation and receive bonuses from the formation. In addition, in the courtyard, some of the master's cabinets and boxes can also be opened with beads of corresponding colors and shapes." Yesterday, when Chaos first told him that he had forgotten a lot of things, Pete actually thought it was just a rhetoric, a means and rhetoric of this young lord. However, today, after his observation, Chaos seems to have truly forgotten many, many things. But for Pete, this is not a bad thing either. At least for now, Chaos appears more like a lord with a future. After Pete left, Keith called in Sylvia and personally changed her badge. Today's Sylvia naturally did not wear the same long robe jacket as before, nor did she wear the erotic outfit like a silk-like jumpsuit. Instead, she wore a light armor set that was different from those silver armor guards, with only a small amount of metal armor on the front chest, back, and thighs, and the rest mostly connected by softer leather, making it more convenient to move around. There is a dedicated slot on the breastplate that can be used to infiltrate the badge. After removing the previous temporary badge and replacing it with the bodyguard badge, Keith smiled and lightly flicked the breastplate with his finger. "Is this armor custom-made? Is it a bit small? It feels stuffy to wear." However, as soon as she finished speaking, when she saw Sylvia's instantly flushed face, Keith realized that this was a bit frivolous. Fortunately, he glanced at the aperture behind Sylvia's head, still sparkling blue and unchanged. "Don't the master like this armor? If the master doesn't like it, the servant won't wear it tomorrow," Salvira whispered. "Don't call yourself a servant in the future," said Chaos. "Ah. But. Vila, you are my personal guard." "Don't call yourself a servant," Keith repeated. "Yes," Salvira replied with a lowered head. Although she couldn't understand why being a personal guard shouldn't be called a servant, Keith's tone made her instinctively comply. "As for the armor, let's put it on for now. I'll think about it later and get it ready for you," Keith said. Last night, while reading a book, he read some introductions of enchanted equipment, weapons, and so on, which he was quite interested in. Even if he wants to cultivate magic or spiritual energy himself, he cannot be very strong in a short period of time, so if he wants to play with equipment, it is natural for Sylvia and Harvey to try it out. After distributing the badge to Sylvia, Keith went to the study again. First, head straight to the boxes and cabinets discovered last night, open them with beads of corresponding colors and shapes, and then Chaos inspects the contents inside. In the first box, a thick stack of physical versions of the soul subordination contract was found. However, according to the introduction in the relevant books he read last night, this thing is only useful for the Holy Blessing Palace and the Lord himself. It is convenient to terminate or transfer the contract, and others cannot do anything to get it. Even if it is destroyed, it does not affect the actual effect of the soul subordination contract. If even the soul subordination contract in the Lord's hand is lost, they can still seek compensation from the Holy Blessing Palace. Opening 3 boxes in a row, they are all full of sheepskin contracts. However, in addition to the physical version of the soul subordination contract, there are also some land contracts and the like. It is estimated that most of the important items of the Lee family are placed here. He didn't take a closer look either, so he put them aside and opened the locked boxes and cabinets one by one. Although there are many locks, most of them are of the same color and shape, and when all are opened, only 4 bead strings are used. Among all the objects, the ones that surprised Chaos the most were several objects that looked at least 30 inches in size and resembled photos. Looking at the picture above, which is probably a family portrait of the descendants of the Lee family, and looking at the lifelike faces, Chaos was really surprised. At this level, it's impossible for it to be painted, but is there a camera in this world? Every time he constructs a silhouette of the world, there are always some new discoveries that he has to overturn and start over. Are there any other travelers who have already taken the lead? Keith didn't get too caught up in the huge family photos. After roughly reviewing the objects, he returned to his desk in the study and began flipping through the books and materials related to the soul subordination contract. He had previously seen some functions of the soul subordination contract, such as controlling life and death, punishing pain, and so on. When chatting with Harvey, Pete, and others, he also heard them mention things like spiritual explosion devouring bodies, which are all things that the owners of the soul subordination contract can use. However, he had never thought about using this to punish or kill anyone before, so he did not actually try it. After seeing the aperture and keen perception of others' emotions, he naturally believed it was the effect of a soul-dependent contract. But today, after seeing the halo behind Dominic and those punishing knights, he suddenly realized that this was not an accessory ability brought about by the soul subordination contract, so he naturally thought, how should the corresponding ability of the soul subordination contract be called? Want a contract servant to die, just watch him command him to die. The book he read last night only had a rough introduction and not very detailed content. Today, he placed all the relevant books and materials he found on the table, flipped through them one by one, and finally saw the specific description. The master of the soul's subordinate contract, when facing his own contract servant, can appear several invisible chains in his consciousness, pull the corresponding chains, and have a corresponding impact on the contract servant. There aren't any chains, are there? Whether it was Sylvia, Harvey, Pete, or the guards and servants in other estates, the Lu Hao and one I saw today had no chains, not even a single thread. Chaos carefully examined the relevant explanations and various specific descriptions of the soul subordination contract, and the more he looked, the more he became alarmed. He had to accept a possibility. As a traveler, he did not obtain the soul subordination contract of the original owner, or did not fully obtain the corresponding permissions and functions of the soul subordination contract. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Crazy Night. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Crazy Night is the soul subordination contract on the servant of the Lee family still present. Through flipping through the books, Keith believed that they should still be there. Because according to the description in the book, if the soul subordinate contract is untied, the contract servant will have a very obvious perception. So there are several possibilities now. 1. Before he traveled, the contract of subordination of the Lee family's soul had not been transmitted to the original owner. 2. The contract servants of the Lee family were all stuck due to his time travel, in a state where there was a soul-dependent contract but no dependent lord. 3. The consciousness of the original owner dissipated, and after the body was taken away, the soul subordinate contract was used to determine that the link layer between the servants and the Lord was not broken, but the functional module had been covered. Therefore, in the judgment, those people were all contract servants of Chaos, but in reality, he had no control over their life and death. The first possibility should be very small. After all, this type of inheritance involving the entire family's soul subordination contract involves the participation of the Holy Blessing Palace, and it is unlikely to create such a trick. In the second and third cases, he will have to wait until he has a better understanding and research of the soul subordination contract, magic, spiritual energy, and more underlying energy systems in this world before he can understand. Previously, he breathed a sigh of relief when he learned about the existence of the soul subordination contract. He did not evaluate the quality of this thing for now, as its existence indeed gave Keith a considerable sense of security and confidence in his actions. But now I realize that I cannot truly exercise the function of the soul subordination contract, and everything is different again. If there were no constraints from the soul subordination contract, those servants with all gray or a small amount of purple halos would not immediately rebel, but it is inevitable to be cautious in the dark. Only contract servants with blue halos like Harvey and Lu Hao dare to use them with confidence, and the only one who can still fully trust them is probably the all-blue Sylvia. From this perspective, the observation ability of this favorable aperture is not just an icing on the cake, but rather a bit of a helping hand in the snow. However, even contract servants with a blue halo cannot let them actively discover that Chaos currently does not have control over the soul subordination contract, because it not only concerns the soul subordination contract, but also the legitimacy of his lord identity. Chaos, sitting at the table, had a somewhat solemn expression on his face and needed to reassess the situation he was facing. At lunchtime, Chaos made a last-minute decision to eat in the outdoor garden. Reading a bunch of books in the study, his mind felt a bit stuffy, as if he had returned to the state of his past life's college entrance examination. He needed to breathe fresh air and look at the flowers and plants. The taste of the food is still very good. According to his previous life standards, the dishes here can be said to be a mixture of Chinese and Western, with a slightly more Chinese flavor. Along with other details he observed, as well as the Eastern faces and surnames of himself, Sylvia, Lu Hao, and others, he couldn't help but speculate whether his compatriots had already traveled here and had already undergone a round of construction and renovation. Because he was the only one to eat, Chaos didn't understand any aristocratic etiquette, and the servants next to him were even more afraid to remind him. Therefore, he could be said to have eaten very quickly. After finishing his meal, sitting in the garden, drinking tea and looking at Sylvia, who was guarding him a few meters away, Chaos couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. In theory, this young personal guard, who had only seen the original owner for the first time 2 days ago and had not been in real contact with him for a day, could have the highest level of intimacy among all. A burst of noise disrupted Keith's thinking. He followed the sound and saw a knight rushing in from the entrance of the estate, flying a obstructing servant. The servants around rushed forward one after another to stop them, whether they were servants who didn't know magic or spiritual energy, or fully armed guards, none of them retreated to escape. Quickly, the knight's mount was killed, and the other person rolled and fell to the ground, then immediately ejected and jumped directly into the air. Lu Hao and a group of silver-armored guards from the manor had already rushed over with weapons, and everyone had a faint glow on their bodies, which was still very noticeable under the scorching noon sun. Is this spiritual energy? Chaos was both nervous and excited, and couldn't help but stand up. Don't be afraid, master. There are maids. I'm here. With that incident in hand, Harvey next to Chaos immediately charged forward, while Sylvia retreated and protected his side. Keith nodded. He is not actually very afraid now, because as the distance approaches, he can already feel the person's crazy emotions, and at the same time, he can also see the aperture behind the person's head. That is a completely gray aperture, which means there is neither good nor bad impression towards him. It is unlikely that such a person is coming towards him to assassinate him. Strange. How could he come in directly? Why hasn't the magic formation activated defense? Looking at the crazy knight, who was fighting against 7 silver-armored guards and Lu Hao but still didn't fall behind, Sylvia frowned and wondered. Just as he rushed out, Pete, the butler who walked up to Keith, exclaimed in surprise, "This seems to be the chief guard of Mr. Mill's house. Is it Carez?" As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Hao, who was fighting over there, suddenly let out a loud roar. The manor simultaneously emitted white light from several directions, concentrating on Lu Hao, causing his already emitted light to skyrocket. He swung his large sword in both hands and slashed at the mad knight fiercely. Harvey, who arrived, immediately took advantage of the moment when he was entangled by Lu Hao and resisted with all his might. He took the heavy shield handed over by the nearby guards and hit it. With a roar, a huge light burst out under the white light shooting around the estate, and his body collided with the mad knight. The crazy knight had no choice but to avoid and was knocked down to the ground. Harvey took advantage of the situation and tried to suppress him through a heavy shield. A group of silver-armored guards quickly surrounded him, and Lu Hao's big sword cut off his exposed right arm, splattering blood. It seems that this unwelcome guest has been taken down, but to my surprise, a red light exploded, and Harvey and a group of silver-armored guards were all thrown into the air. Even the 10th level high-level spiritual energy warrior, as well as the Lu Hao, who clearly had a strengthened array, were thrown over Kyoza's head with swords and hung on a tree behind him. Then, in a mist of blood, Kyoza saw a man with a missing arm, his whole body covered in blood and flesh, roaring out like a zombie that had already decayed all over. At this moment, the crazy knight was less than 10 meters away from Keith's dining table in the garden. Sylvia activated without warning, with a light figure like a hunting cat, and instantly rushed to the crazy knight, who had become a flesh and blood monster. After the appearance of the crazy knight, Kyoza was a little worried or even scared for the first time. But Sylvia didn't make him worry for too long. After rushing to the mad knight, she had already simultaneously pulled out the straight sword with her backhand, and her whole body burst into a dazzling light under the spiritual energy of the mana array. The blade cut a straight line from top to bottom, directly splitting the mad knight in half. In Kyoza's sight, two red bodies parted left and right, and a blood mist erupted. Salvira, with a cold and stern face, stood up with her knife, looking back in the dazzling sunlight, feeling incredibly cool. End of this chapter.